God is holy. What does that mean, holy? When we talk about God's holiness? Just a couple of theologies. I've got several on the shelf, but one of them defines God's holiness as being separated from that which is common or profane. Okay. Another theology, a very popular theology today, is to say that God means that God's holiness means that he is separated from sin and he's devoted to seeking his own honor. Are these good definitions of what it means for God to be holy? Both of those definitions, one separated from that which is profane and the other separated from sin. The problem with that is that in eternity past, before there was any creation and there was only God, then how was God holy? There was no sin for him to be separated. There was nothing profane or common from God from which God could be separated. So what did it mean for God to be holy? Well, their definitions are in part true, but I think that there's another aspect to this that hopefully we'll flesh out over the next few studies. We're going to start today by looking in Leviticus chapter 11, verse 44, that says, "For I am the Lord, I am Yahweh, your God, and you are to sanctify or set me apart or make me holy yourselves, and be holy because I am holy." So he says, I am holy. There's our word. If you want to learn the Hebrew word, it's the word kadosh. And so he says, I am holy. You must not defile yourself. And the word defile means don't make yourself unclean with anything that's swarming things that creep on the ground. So you think of bugs and mice and all the things that run around on the ground. Don't defile yourself with those. And that had to do with maybe touching them, handling them, eating them, using them in rituals, which a lot of religions did. But don't defile yourself. Don't make yourself ceremonially unclean by simply touching those things. And so when he says you are to be holy by not doing this, it is in light of the fact that God is holy. God is separated. So is God separated that he doesn't touch the swarming things? Well, there's one sense he certainly does, because he permeates all of creation. But he's not made ceremonial unclean because he doesn't use those things in any way that's inappropriate. That's not the way God relates to his creation. And if we understand this idea of God being holy, then we turn and we're going to look through a number of passages that talk about holiness in different regards, and hopefully use these to illustrate holiness in a way that sometimes we may never have thought of. In Genesis chapter 2 and verse 3, after God has created the universe, it says in verse 3, "Then God blessed the seventh day and sanctified it." Now, sanctified is simply the verb form of the word holy, but it comes to us through Latin rather than through Germanic languages. And as a result, we're using two words to really refer to the same word family. And so we have kadesh here for the verb, where kadosh is the quality of being holy, the adjective and the noun. And so we have this thing, God blessed the seventh day and sanctified it, or made it holy, or set it apart. Because, and this is why now he's going to give us a reason, because in it he rested, or he sabbat, he ceased. God didn't have to put up his feet and take a nap on this day. He stopped creating. That's the significance of Sabbath. He ceased from the activity of creating. Didn't mean he ceased even everything. In fact, one of the things we know from the book of Colossians and from the book of Hebrews is that he actually holds that creation together. So he didn't stop doing that. He created it, but then he holds it together. So he was still active that way. So the seventh day is special because it's the day in which God stopped creating. He stopped that work, and therefore he made that day special. Now, this had special import for the people of Israel because they were actually going to be under a rule of this Sabbath. Nobody from the time of Moses or from the time of Adam up to the time of Moses was under any kind of a Sabbath rule, and since the time of Christ, since he left the earth, We have not been under any kind of rule like that. But it still meant that that day was special in that regard because he ceased from his activities. Now, the next one, it's going to surprise you. It says in verse 21 of Genesis 38, and he, this is talking about Jacob, asked the men of her place, saying, where is the temple prostitute? We're going, what in the world? What did you bring us to? Who was by the road Anim. But they said, well, there's never been a temple prostitute there. And the word temple prostitute here is actually a form of this word holy. And we go, what? What does that mean? Well, the word simply meant set apart. And it meant set apart from that which was normal. And so in this case, this particular woman, and you can read the whole story. It was kind of a crazy, interesting thing that all transpired for God to carry on the bloodline through which Jesus Christ, interestingly enough, would come. But the idea of this woman as a temple prostitute was that she was set apart from normal activity that a woman would normally be involved in with a husband, that she was dedicated to serving in this way, in a way that we would find very repulsive, but serving in this way within the religious community of those people. Not necessarily the religious ideas that Jacob held to, but it's what he was involved in. But it's a good illustration, really, of something that's really outside of the way we think in terms of being set apart. Exodus chapter 19 and verse 23, when God is going to come down on Mount Sinai and speak to the sons of Israel, he's going to speak specifically with Moses. And Moses said to the Lord, the people cannot come up to Mount Sinai, for you warned us, saying, set bounds about the mountain, and we have this consecrate it. All the word consecrate is another word for sanctify. I don't know why they ever chose to use this word consecrate. To me, it really confuses the matter. It's literally, you're going to set it apart. You're going to separate it. You're going to set it apart. In other words, normally if there were mountains, people could go up. They could go up to the foothills. They could walk around on the bottom of it. They could touch the mountain. That's normal, right? But if these people walked up to the mountain, they walked past the boundaries, if they touched the mountain, if they broke through, they would be killed. God would come out against them and kill them. So the mountain was consecrated, as they have here, or set apart. Okay, and I think that that's really an important idea for us to get. In Deuteronomy chapter 22, in verse 9, he says, you shall not sow your vineyard with two kinds of seed, lest the whole yield be forfeited, the group that you have sown and the yield of the vineyard. And the word that he's talking here about forfeited is a form of our word holy. And in other words, it's all going to have to be set apart. Now, set apart from the fact that you can't use it. What do you normally do when you have a crop and you harvest it? You set it apart for you to use. You set it apart and you get to eat it. But what he's warning them is, you sow two kinds of seed in a vineyard, you're going to have to set it apart, and you won't be able to use any of the crop of that vineyard for you to eat or to use and participate in any way. So don't do that. He says, don't sow two kinds of seed. It's very interesting. And this is hard because most of your Bibles, they don't represent this word well, but it's actually our word. And if in the ESV, in their marginal note, they actually do indicate that this is, or become holy. And it becomes holy not in that it's set apart from sin, it's set apart from common use, in the same way that the seventh day God did that with regard to what he was doing, in the same way that that woman was set apart from common use, in the same way that the mountain was set apart from common use. It's set apart from something that we would normally have thought to be, in most of those situations, normal. In fact, in the temple that they're going to build out in the future, in Ezekiel chapter 43 and verse 20, he measured it on the four sides. It had a wall all around, the length 500 and the width 500, to divide between the holy and the profane. And profane, as bad as that sounds, it just means that which was common. So there's common area, and then there's set apart special area. Common versus special. Not everybody does this. We don't particularly fuss and fight about it a great deal in our house, A lot of people, when you walk in the house, you take your shoes off because you're not going to bring the common, the dirt and everything of the outside and bring it into the space that you work especially to keep clean. And we do in our house work especially to keep that area clean. But we don't necessarily fuss over taking the shoes off. And some of you might be aghast that we don't do that, but it just is not a habit that we particularly have all the time. But that would be a good illustration of the holy, the set apart, that would be the inside the door, and the profane, the outside the door. And it doesn't mean the outside's evil or horrible, it just means that it's common. And so then this brings us to one last verse that I want to look at today, and it's not going to illustrate it, it's just going to relate this holiness to God. And this is Jesus' prayer in John 17 for his disciples. And he says, I am no longer in the world, and yet they themselves, that is these disciples, they are in the world, and I am coming to you, Holy Father. Keep them safe by your name, or in your name, and many of your Bibles have here. He addresses him as Holy Father. In other words, he is not a God that's like others. He is set apart. He's distinct. We're going to come back to this. You need to keep all this in mind because we're going to come back and use this and helping us understand something about what it meant for God to be holy. And it meant more than that he was separated from sin, as something very important about the character of God. But in this regard, the Holy Father, it's that holiness, that thing that where he's really set apart and unique in this way, that it's appropriate for him to keep these disciples safe. Their safekeeping doesn't hinge on their being good. Their safekeeping hinges on God being this holy God. So hopefully, even though we haven't fleshed out yet what it really means for God to be holy, we've primarily illustrated the word holy today. Hopefully it gives you a little perspective on this idea of holy as being set apart from something that would be common, or set apart from something that would be different. And it starts to give you some ideas to think when we're thinking about God and God being holy. Something perhaps to get you ready to worship God with regard to his holiness. And with that, I encourage you to have a good day in the Lord, and thank you for joining me.